In 1994, Chady was at his peak. His drug empire was continuing to expand, and his henchmen had eliminated virtually all rivals, making murder commonplace on the streets of Trinidad. But then he ordered the massacre that would eventually lead him to the gallows. It began when a petty criminal known as Mice was overheard outlining a plan to extort money from Chady by kidnapping 2 of his teenage children.
Dole Chady then ordered that Mice be murdered. He took the threat seriously. On the night that the murders took place, they met at Dole's farm where they planned how they were going to execute the murder. And as they were leaving, Joey Ramaya, one of Dole's right-hand man, his executioner, turned to Dole and said, well, what happens if we meet other people there? Whereupon Dole said, well then, kill everybody.
Silence hung over Puran Street in Williamsville this morning
made to lie on
after
the floor.
4 masked men
His sister
claiming
Monica
to be police
was also
officers.
put next to them by the gunmen, who then shot all 3 through the head.
My son, my grandson, my granddaughter, and my daughter-in-law was died. And I am hurt. I cannot say how much I hurt. I real hurt. And nobody could compensate me for that, but God.
The only survivors of the massacre were Mice's brother Osmond, 13, and sister Nemeti, 6, who had hidden in the next room.
Who do you think was responsible?
Dole Chady. Dole Chady was responsible for the whole show.
Though Trinidad was becoming used to murder, the country was in shock. The pressure was on the police to act. Detectives soon discovered evidence linking a car found abandoned on Chady's estate to the killings. The police and the army were ordered to arrest the murderers and the man who had ordered the killings.
Chady was at his Peparo residence, and immediately the first of his gang was arrested. He got word of it and immediately left his compound and was headed to the north coast of Trinidad. I would think as the crow flies, it's probably about 30 or 40 miles away. However, he was intercepted. No doubt, once he had hit the north coast, he would have been off to Venezuela, because he could have gone anywhere.
With Chady behind bars, the police and army searched the land surrounding his ranch.
Over 20 kilos of cocaine was found buried in a barrel and covered with earth and straw. Near where the heliport area is, another 40 yards away, several firearms were found wrapped in plastic and cellophane bags with ammunition. And in another area, approximately 20 yards away from where we are now, a barrel was found beneath the earth, was approximately $1.3 million.
As the Babulal family was laid to rest, Trinidad's leaders were under increasing pressure from the public to take decisive action against the drug barons who were turning this tropical island into a bloodbath. The government's response was to ensure that Chady and his henchmen were put to death. With Chady facing trial for murder, Trinidad's new government began its fight back. The state confiscated his ranch and took back the land he had illegally seized a decade earlier. It was rebuilt as a rehabilitation center for drug addicts, and America's Attorney General was invited to witness its opening.
This ground on which we stand at one point was occupied
by a notorious drug lord. You can look around and see the orchard, the buildings, and the helipad he built with blood money he acquired by feeding poison to our people and to your people.
Mr. Attorney General, you are a leader in the entire hemisphere in your efforts to deal with crime in a sensible, common sense way. If the world dreamed as you did, we would all be better off.
But seizing Chady's ranch was only the beginning. The government's next step would arouse worldwide controversy. If the courts did convict him of ordering the murders of the Babulal family, the government would revive the death penalty. The police persuaded Clint Huggins, a member of the gang which carried out the murders, to testify against the man he called the boss. Chady was about to be betrayed by a supergrass in his own ranks.
We knew that Dole Chady would leave no stone unturned to ensure his demise. As a result, we had to make sure that we had extra security in place to take care of any such eventuality.
Huggins was given round-the-clock protection in an army safe house. Here he gave details to the police and to Major General Brown about the Babulal murders.
They were asking the young fellow in the house, where's Mice? He said, well, Mice used to live there, but he doesn't live there anymore. Anyway, the description we got, he matched the description. So, guys went and asked her what she needed. So, well, he both said to kill everybody. Cook went back and shot each of them in the head.
He gave graphic details of the murders, previous murders that took place. He gave details of corruption involving policemen. He gave details of corruption involving 2 or 3 magistrates.
Within 2 months, the army discovered that Chady had offered a soldier $1 million bribe to kill Huggins.
The plot was that they would poison the water system to the safe house. We decided that we would go along with that plot, and we arranged to fake his death.
To make it look realistic, Huggins was given medicine to make him sick and muscle relaxant to make him lifeless. Then his body was removed by soldiers dressed as undertakers.
The press was alerted that Clint Huggins was dead, and his father supposedly identified the body. He was a very good actor, by the way. He was crying. He was interviewed by the press. And it was at that stage that the entire country became aware that Clint Huggins was dead.
An elaborate plot was then hatched to arrest the conspirators as the bribe was handed over.
We arranged that soldiers would play the part of vagrants in Port of Spain, and at the precise moment when the monies were being transferred from Dole Chady's henchmen to the soldiers who were dressed as vagrants effected the arrest, and he was handed over to the police.
While the plotters were jailed for 15 years, Huggins was returned to his army safe house. Fatally, he became bored, and in early 1996, he decided to celebrate Trinidad's carnival. He gave his guards the slip and went to join the party.
He was a guy that loved his freedom. He felt he was invincible. And well, he didn't last 24 hours. He was murdered and his body was found in a burnt car on one of the highways in East Trinidad.
But the government had another weapon. A second member of the gang, Levi Morris, agreed to give evidence against Chady. In return, his life would be spared. The trial was the longest in Trinidad's history, keeping the public gripped for 56 days. Chady employed 12 lawyers, including Queen's Counsel from England. But with Morris's evidence crucial, all 9 were found guilty of the murders of the Babulal family. They were sentenced to death. A government that had come to power promising to hang convicted killers now had to live up to its promises. Ironically, the man with the power of life and death in his hands, the Attorney General, had long been an opponent of the death penalty.
When he was an ordinary politician, it made sense for him to campaign on human rights, on a human rights platform. Once he became Attorney General, and given the background against which the party came to power, the crime rate and so on, then it was the politic thing to do to promote capital punishment.
When I became the Attorney General, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And I felt it was my duty, and I felt compelled that I had to move every obstacle in order to ensure that the public interest of Trinidad and Tobago was protected.
If the Attorney General was to succeed, he needed to overturn 20 years of his island's legal history. Though the death penalty had remained on the statute book, only one murderer had been executed in 2 decades. Lawyers kept people from the gallows by exploiting delays in a complex appeal system. The final court of appeal was the Privy Council in London. The law said that no one who had been on death row for more than 5 years could be executed. Because appeals took so long, the death penalty was usually commuted to life imprisonment.
The jury convicted him, and the judicial process said that he was guilty. And we felt that unless the court said that he should not be executed, the executive arm of the state should do all in its power to ensure that the mandate of the people was carried out.
It became a cat and mouse game. The defense began a battery of appeals accusing the government of political motives, of breaching human rights. They said JD and his gang had not been given a fair trial. Each time the government answered back. Everything had been done according to the law, and they wanted all murderers to face the ultimate penalty. Finally, the cases arrived at the Privy Council in London, which ruled that Trinidad was entitled to execute under its own constitution. All the appeals had been completed within 3 years. On June the 3rd, 1999, JD and his gang members were read their death warrants. The first 3 were scheduled to hang at 6 a.m. the next day. 150 religious and political leaders, including Desmond Tutu, Jesse Jackson and John Hume, had made a last-minute plea for mercy, but the government rejected it.
त्र्यंबकं यजामहे सुगंधिं पुष्टिवर्धनं उर्वारुकमियं बन्धनान् मृत्योरुम उक्षे मामावृत्ता.
The day that many people gathered here this morning thought would never come has. Dole, Chedi, Joey Ramaya and Ram Kelawan Singh were all hanged this morning. Cipriani Batiste, prison's commissioner, says none of the men had any last words or tears.
The orders of the court have been carried out. He walked calmly to the gallows. He had made peace with his God.
The media celebrated, in a sense, the death by following the dead people, not only from the gallows, but right to the grave. You had this spectacle of pine boxes dripping with blood being put in unmarked graves. So blood and death for 3 days in Trinidad became a celebration, and it was quite appalling. Quite appalling.
The hangings provoked an international outcry, with the British government making a formal protest. But the people of Trinidad supported the executions. Polls suggested up to 90% backed the death penalty.
I think it's real good news. They should use Dole, Chedi and these men as an example. I think justice was served there.
It's good to know, well then, justice can be done, because people have going in and doing things like that and getting off, scotch-free and things like that. I am happy about the decision, because it's time this country, somebody do something about cleaning up this country.
Despite the controversy, Trinidad's leaders insisted that the executions were the only way to protect the country from the drug barons.
The government did not have an option of just locking him up. Dole Chedi had the ability to run his criminal rings even from the prison. And one could have just imagined that having killed, that he would have been in prison running a drug trade in which he would have been able to continue shipping cocaine, which would not only go to America, but would go to England and to go to Europe, and which would be used to poison the children of England.
Everyone agrees that arresting Dole Chedi and smashing his gang produced a spectacular drop in the murder rate. But critics say that this happened purely because Dole Chedi and his men spent so long in jail awaiting sentence. There was no need to kill them. The government, though, is pushing through new ways of speeding up the legal process. The hangings will continue.